the electronic music network of the 80s. It was basically people from around the country, around the world, that were doing similar things with sound and with audio. Similar being that they were creating stuff on their own, doing it in their own houses, garages, studios, not working in professional studios. And they were putting their noise and their music onto primarily cassette tapes and sending them to each other, sending them out to some fanzines that were around at the time, and sending them out to some radio stations that were playing underground music made by people just on their own.
What I would say is that there was more of a scene of a lot of people doing their own music without any influence of a manager or a businessman or a businesswoman telling them what to do.
Well, when I began networking, it was about 1984 or 1985. I had become familiar with the sort of cassette underground in the early 1980s. There was no record company, there was no agents, there was no middleman. It was direct contact with other people doing music, and a lot of weird music, and a lot of just regular rock songs as well. But that was exciting to me.
Again, it was the monolithicness of the record industry, and people who had a desire to break away from that could now do stuff, and that a cassette. And then, for instance, if you just connected with one other person or two other people and you heard their music and they heard yours, that was enough.
Just a lot of gigs, friends, hopes, dreams and possibilities. That's what the network meant to me.
I guess initially I would describe it as something that was totally going on without me. And I just kind of discovered it by accident. I would get a hold of a cassette and I would listen to this stuff, and I was just shocked that all this, there apparently was this network that I didn't know about, and I was only catching, like the ends of it, various tentacles. So I would have to kind of, reverse engineer it and find out, well, where did this tape come from, and who sells them, and where can I get more, and who are these people? Yeah, it was something that I had to explore, and I didn't know what it was.
In an effort to network the music, to get it out there and get it heard, me and several friends started Onslaught magazine. It was a magazine that was based around experimental, unusual electronic musics that were something that the larger labels certainly wouldn't have been interested with, and as time has proven, they certainly weren't.
A big part of the networking process for me was producing compilation albums, and I produced 4 of them between 1987 and 1990, and they were called the Grindstone series, which this is a part of, and they included a wide variety of musics, including everything from industrial to space rock to ambient, and those compilation albums were a way for me to help other artists that I knew to get out and get a little more exposure, to inspire each other, to communicate with each other.
The machines were so varied and budgets varied from artist to artist that the sounds and styles really did differ.
There were just lots of people doing all kinds of music, experimental noise. I think when I started, I'm not even sure I knew what electronic music was. Because I just sat there and had this noise that I had to get out of myself.
A lot of the music that I was involved in, I would consider it to be maybe or just experimental or avant-garde or non-classifiable.
The music would be synthesizer music, electronic music, either droney type stuff, some semi-pop, maybe a little bit of dance floor stuff, not much. Music concrete, avant-garde, experimental type stuff. Branched out into recording space rock type stuff in the vein of the synthesizer players for Hawkwind and Held On, Tangerine Dream, Soft Machine, etc.
Soundscapes with various instruments, and that's pretty much what Curious Voltage is. It's myself with various instruments, either the lead melody or somewhere in between, and lay it over with lots of guitar track, Evo harmonized, reverb, delay, pitch shifted.
I certainly was influenced by popular music of the time. Some of the punk rock bands, people like Elvis Costello, Talking Heads. I was very influenced by that kind of thing, and that kind of had, it played a role in my own music, but basically my own music was more or less just an exposure of myself, sort of autobiographical.
It was basically noise. I tried to change any kind of sound that I heard into something else. I basically wanted to change my entire environment with sound. I wasn't happy with Gary Newman or any of those bands that were out during the time, and I just wanted to hear something different. I wanted to hear something that I've never heard before. I'm going to make my own music. I'm going to make my own sounds.
I would just make weird noises or sounds or stuff, and I just tried to, you know, it's like I would think of all the music that was out there, and I would think, well, what's missing? What am I not hearing? And that's what I would play.
I think what we were doing was really meant for more exploration of sonics, conceptual ideas, and just something that was altogether less commercial and more personalized, I think, in a way.
Of course, there were the commercial artists like Fat Gadget and John Fox doing that sort of thing at the time, but I think our music was raw, a little more honest, a little less produced, and certainly on a lower budget. And in time, that proved to be an invaluable thing to have to work with sort of those restraints.
My sound at the beginning in 1980 to 83 was based on a lot of influence of people like Eno, who were experimenting with tape decks and using them in creative ways, and using creative sound sources for the production. I experimented a lot with that, along with analog synthesizers.
Circumstances are nothing to you.
His heart is fixed. His heart is fixed.
Even surpass space.
if there was any relationship, and it was, I mean, to the DIY and the punk thing, was just the DIY. It was the fact that you can make something sound good with one or two chords and one or two notes and not knowing what you're doing, and that anybody could do anything. So everything was done in terms of production, etc. was always done by myself. The cassette covers were done by myself.
The punk and electronic bands from England during the day, I think, were a huge influence because they showed a lot of people that you could actually do these things yourself. You could put it out yourself, you could record it yourself, you could make your own covers, you could just do everything you wanted it to and just do it yourself, you know, and just send it out to people and they would send you things back. So it was a big influence, definitely.
The punk rock bands, the Sex Pistols, the Clash, Stiff Little Fingers, bands like that came out. I got very excited by the energy that it presented, and that carried over into the 80s for me, into my own music, really. I'd already been doing music for many years myself, just for my own fun. And then in the mid-80s, I realized that I could just do it myself. I'd have my own label, which I called Lonely Whistle, based on my sort of love for the sound of trains. Then I realized I could have some of my friends on my label. And that's what I did. I didn't have to rely on anybody else but myself. I made the covers, I did the recording, I made the cassettes, and I traded them.
I used to do some writing for a lot of those punk magazines, some scene reports for Flipside magazine out of California, and Maximum Rock and Roll, two of the larger publications out there that covered punk rock, and some smaller ones as well.
The punk movement gave more fuel to the fire, made all the music, gave it a much hotter edge to it.
There was a spirit of, first of all, a lot of energy, and also that we can do it ourselves. It doesn't have to be through a studio, it doesn't have to be through a big label. Just get out there, get some gear, doesn't matter what it is. Could be anything from a beat-up old synth to a couple of rocks, and get, express ourselves. Put it out, put it on tape, try to do something interesting, and get a little bit more extreme than what was going on in the mainstream. Try to do something a little bit different, a little bit thought-provoking.
Me, myself, and other folks, it's like you would go that whole, all the way to the end, record it, make copies of it, make a cover, give it a name, give it to people, you went through that whole length.
I was inspired by the punk scene because I had been listening to them since the late 70s, and by the early 80s I realized that these guys were really onto the next form of what the music business would become. That it would be independent, that the artists would have more control, that the artists would be able to network amongst themselves in order to promote and distribute their work.
Really never bothered with or wasted time sending out demo tapes, as it was pretty common knowledge that all of that stuff went into the trash bins of these larger labels anyway.
It wasn't like I was going to work on getting a record contract to release this stuff, but I went immediately out, made some cassette copies, and gave them out to a lot of people, and so that sort of the whole motivation for self-publication was that that was the way that it was the most convenient and quick to get it out there to people that I knew that might be interested.
Because the system at the time, the big system with the record labels and all that, was such this mysterious big black box that you didn't think you even had access or the right to even bother them with your piddly little bedroom 4-track experiments, that, you know, you just figured, I'm just going to do it myself and see what happens.
The primary reason for me to release my work on my own was that I wanted to have control over the entire package, from initial concept and recording to the final artwork, all of that. I just wanted to be able to take this thing in an artistic way and follow through on all the steps.
My very first tape was recorded on a TAC 4-track reel-to-reel, and I basically applied sound-on-sound techniques to record one thing over another. It also gave me the ability to speed things up and slow things down by playing around with the record speed. You know, when we went into the studio, you know, we really didn't know exactly what we were going to do. We just knew, you know, that we were going to blast out. We were going to turn the equipment on and make as much fucking noise as we could possibly make. And that's what made it fun.
Well, my recording process when I first began was back in the 70s, actually late 60s, when we just set up a reel-to-reel recorder in my friend Jeff's parents' house. And we just skronked and played weird stuff.
The first cassette that I released was created using a couple of reel-to-reel tape recorders. And they were basically set up in such a way that I would push the limits of how much I could record out of my speakers with a microphone, at the same time adding some new sound with another microphone, making tape after tape that way.
You record something on a cassette, you play it back through stereo, you play some mics real carefully and play along with that. Hopefully the mics recorded you and what was coming out of the speaker, and that went on for a little bit. I ended up with a 4-track cassette, and that's pretty much where I did most of my Curious Voltage recordings. It was on a Yamaha MT4 4-track.
So I ended up getting gear, borrowing gear that would work or what have you, or using just what was around, and found sounds and cheesy Casio keyboard at the beginning.
Back then we were laying down tracks on wide 2-inch tape, and we were limited to how we could edit that stuff in the final mixing with the amount of fingers we had, basically.
Wow, I had a bunch of junk in my room, basically. I had just odds and ends and fucked up speakers and miscellaneous gear around, and I worked on a 4-track, TAC 4-track machine, and then just mixed it down onto a master cassette that I would use to dub my tapes from.
I had a 4-track that we had purchased to make a demo for the band. In the process of learning how to use this 4-track, I would just overlay my own stuff.
I went from recording with analog reel-to-reel tapes using analog synthesizers and dubbing tracks one by one from machine to machine.
Well, I guess the difference between cassette culture and vinyl culture is people had more money. If I'd had more dough, I guess I might have done more. I would have done records. Certainly, in terms of sending things out to radio stations and/or distributors, etc. I mean, people dealt with cassettes, but it certainly wasn't their choice of format. So, in terms of your actually getting your music potential airplay, and/or if you wanted to carry by stores and such, you certainly had a better chance of having a record do that, or vinyl, as opposed to cassette.
There was only one choice for me, and that was the cassette format. I mean, it was cheap. CDs really weren't around too much in the early '80s, so it was a cheap format that you could use, and everybody could use around the world to trade music with.
Chose to do cassette because it's cheap and affordable, and had all the gear to record to cassette. So that was the most easiest, feasible, economical way to do so.
Well, it wasn't really that much of a choice. Vinyl at the time was kind of like the holy grail. So I probably would have had I had the money to put out vinyl in the early 80s, but it didn't happen until later. So it was just, cassette was the way to go. It was cheap, and it was available, and it was easy, and that was it.
Making the leap from cassette to vinyl was important because that opened up a lot of doors that were closed to cassette. For instance, the radio scene, college radio, was much more apt to play vinyl than cassette. And record stores would take records, even if they were weird stuff, they would take them on vinyl, whereas they might not on cassette. So that transition to vinyl was important if you really wanted to expand your audience base.
People were releasing things on cassette within the electronic and avant-garde underground all the way up until the year 2000 on a regular basis. And right around that time is when CD recording became more available and less expensive to the general public. And as a result of that, there has been a great switch away from cassette recording. When we would send things in the mail with one another, we would get a lot of interesting stuff in the packages, and I always used to like to pack mine with little toys, with promotional information, stuff that others people sent me.
I remember getting a lot of the packages that didn't just have a cassette in them. They had a whole bunch of other stuff in them. Hand-painted, postcards and Xerox things. And it was all part of that just sort of people's-oriented art where you can just sort of, you do it yourself, you send it out, and you communicate one-on-one with people. And when we put the vinyl out, we silk screened the vinyl in my garage. I remember it took days.
The covers, yes.
Yeah, we just got blank white covers and silk screened each one and did 500 of them. That was kind of the attitude of the time too. It's that do-it-yourself thing, make everyone a little bit unique. We were using different colors and marbling effects with the ink, so everybody who got a copy of the record would have something that was, not like a mass-produced thing that was unique to them.
Another important thing that helped the development of the underground music scene as a whole were the technological advances that were made during that time. There was the development of cheap, affordable home recording equipment. There was the development of cheap and affordable synthesizers, both digital and analog. And there was also the development of copying facilities. You could get copies done much cheaper than you ever could before, although they've come down even more now. But back then, copying was just getting going in terms of being affordable. So printing and all these other issues that we had to deal with for trying to get our music out to people all became a lot easier very suddenly. And that was unique to that period.
I was able to work with a large number of artists, either through the mail. We did mail projects where I would lay a few tracks down, send the tape off to some people. They would lay a few tracks down, send it off to somebody else. Then it would come back around maybe after 3 or 4 other people had worked with it.
And sometimes collaborating via the mail by sending partial pieces of incomplete music tracks for them to add to, vice versa. They would send to you, and then their friends would find out. They would turn you on to some of their friends that you didn't know about in this big whole huge little beehive network of like-minded individuals.
I traded recordings with people in the United States and in other countries, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Russia. Even before the wall came down, a lot of us were doing our best to try to trade with people in Czechoslovakia, East Germany.
Well, my networking process was getting in touch with like-minded people, doing similar things, and starting a label, which is Swinging Axe Productions, still around, though very low-key. And basically sending my stuff out to those people, sending them out to some of the fanzines, Option, Sound Choice, Unsound. There was a whole host of magazines that were writing about the stuff and reviewing it.
The process, I think, for the most part, was just being able to exchange music with other people that had the same kind of interests as you did. And it just kind of snowballed into a huge underground, I guess you could say, cassette culture, where, you know, all these people were actually exchanging music with one another, and this was like way before the internet, so it was pretty cool to do. It was a lot of fun.
During that time period in the early 1980s, there did start to develop, obviously, a cassette culture, and people did start to trade tapes. And it was a little while before I really hooked into that whole network, but once I did, it became a very nice place to be. And meeting up with people through my mailbox became a daily experience.
You can connect with a lot of other people who have interests like you do. I would just start writing these people. I'd be buying their cassettes and what they were doing, and that was sort of the impetus for me to start the label, was actually to have something to trade.
Gosh, my networking process would be if I would get a tape or something that I liked, and I found myself listening to it, more than once. I would look and see, where the person was, where they were from, if they were from the state nearby me or something like that. And I would just write them. I would say, do you have more cassettes, or where can I get them? Or I would send them one of my own, and then generally some type of rapport would be established from there, some type of conversation.
This was a way of promoting as well as building your communication, because these people that were doing this kind of work needed some sort of forums. Once you got involved in a tape label, you'd find out there was a lot of other tapes that were being made by people, and you'd get their addresses and write to them, and they'd write to you. And this happened in the United States as well as all over the world.
The U.S. underground scene as a whole was very uncohesive, as all other artists who were out there working had similar problems. I think finding avenues for your music was difficult. There was no list of cool radio stations, of open magazines. You pretty much had to find these things out by writing letters to people, asking them if they had any tips, any clues on which way to turn.
We were learning it on our own. We did not have anyone instructing us in this, and there was no school to practice it. We worked on it ourselves.
promotion and advertising were difficult because there weren't that many avenues for us to go. We had those small magazines, and that was great, and that was about it because mainstream media wasn't interested in us and it was too expensive for us. So we went with those few resources that we had and made the most of it by keeping in communication, maintaining that loop of talking and writing with other people that did this independent music.
The best way that we found out about one another was through little publications like The Other Sound, or Sound Choice was another magazine. These were done in the mid-'80s up until the early '90s. And this was a place where you could send your cassettes and they would review it and other people could contact you. So magazines like that. Later, Electronic Cottage came out with Al Margolis. This one has Chris Phinney on the cover. These came out in the late '80s. So that was a way of people of getting an address so you could send them something. And then it usually snowballed. Once you started really sending things out all over the world, all of a sudden you started getting things from all over the world, other musics and other people's noise. And it was a great thing to be a part of.
And so in terms of actual networking and finding about stuff, especially in the beginning, it was really Op and then Sound Choice and some of the magazines that had reviews, and I would just sit there and go through all the magazines. That's how you found another musician. You read about something that was interesting. If you did any gigging or tour, you'd probably meet people. It was mostly word of mouth. Again, just like the web today, it's word of mouth.
We'd read through magazines like Sound Choice and Op, or Option, or whatever, and read these reviews of these cassette releases that people sent in, and they would have the contact address, and you'd write these people and end up trading music with these folks.
Magazines like Unsound, Fact Sheet 5, things of this nature, Option Mag, a lot of different magazines that were released basically to showcase reviews and just give a forum for people to discuss music of this nature that was created in your homes. And there's a place where we got reviews and put advertisements, things of that nature. Again, there was no internet, and this was one of the places where you could really hook in with a lot of other artists.
I remember putting an ad into Option magazine. Option was probably the biggie in the States at the time. And I helped them. I remember stuffing envelopes before the magazine was there in Scott Becker's living room with the other people to get the thing going. So ad rates were very cheap. And I ran an ad that was quarter page for $25. I remember the ad just had a picture of a mosquito and the words "think like this." That's all the ad said, but I figured for $25 I can sort of do what I want. Now that I'm thinking back, I don't have a clue as what that was supposed to mean, but there it was.
It got a review in one of the fanzines called The Other Sound. Heavy-duty industrial music, some of the best I heard in a long time. I mean, this goes beyond noise. Rates with the best TG stuff from open to close. This cassette is full of sound, like friction to my ears. Some of the best stuff is on side 2. Heavy-duty distortion that's good quality, like getting the lower part of your body caught in an industrial drill press. Now, with a press release that did a lot to encourage me to do more. So.
The small independent record shops that existed back then, which are almost gone now, were a great resource for networking because they carried the magazines that promoted our music, they carried the music itself, they carried cassettes and albums that other stores wouldn't carry. And a lot of times I would go down to our records here in Lowell, and there would be other musicians hanging out there talking with the owner, Ron. And that was great because we could talk about what's going on in the scene. where can you get gigs, where can you sell your records.
We did try to get it into local record stores, and we had a little bit of success because there were some local record stores such as Rough Trade in San Francisco. There was a few record stores in Berkeley and in Oakland, and we would basically go offer the tape up on consignment, and we would often be very pleased with the results. Sometimes they would buy the tape straight out.
Basically, you just carry your material to them locally, and hopefully you could plant some in the store, and they would sell them for you and give you your money. Distribution was a little rough. That took a little longer to get distribution going. RR Run at RR Records in the United States distributed some in the States, as well as Anomalous Records.
Lon C. Dial was the manager of the Blue Moon Records in Port Huron, and he was also the founding member of Hunting Lodge, and there was a whole little music scene there in Port Huron that catered to this underground electronic music, and Hunting Lodge was a big part of it.
I never had an interest in selling in stores. I used to take my tapes and put them in the library, however. I used to go to one of the branches of the San Jose Library and would give them my tapes, and it was kind of fun to go back in the library and see the tapes.
The stores that were selling my stuff were stores that were just interested in it. There wasn't that many, but they were out there. There was no place local at the time that was carrying my cassettes, and I remember going into one of the local big stores and somehow convincing them to carry 3 of my first cassettes that were on the label. And they put them in a little glass case up by the cash register, and I'd come in to look at them, every few days to see if they were still there. And after 2 weeks, they were still there. And after 3 weeks, they were still there. So I sent a friend of mine in to go and rave about them and then buy the whole thing out. And I thought, well, that's really going to impress the store, and I can come back and sell them more. And he did, and he bought the 3 cassettes. And then when I came back, I was expecting him to, order a bunch, and he just said, yeah, we sold them. That'll do it. And that was the end of it.
So when I went to these record stores, I would talk to the owner, manager, and oftentimes they would tell me about these magazines that they had and say, hey, there's other people out there doing this type of thing too, and you might want to check them out. So that's how I found things like Sound Choice, Option, Electronic Cottage. So the record stores helped us find the other means of communication to get to know each other.
Radio was such a scattered medium. I mean, you could get airplay in Australia and Japan and maybe 1 or 2 stations in America, but you could not cover America so that you could market America.
The coolest thing ever for me was to get a playlist in the mail, and I used to get them like every couple weeks, and I was number 1 on the list. I was the number 1 played song at this radio station, and it did a lot to further my deviance into more dark sounds.
Well, it wasn't radio friendly. It varied. It went anywhere from 5 minutes in length of a song to up to 30 minutes in length of a song. I sent it to college radio stations and community radio stations that actually offered a playlist per se and did certain experimental type shows. And so we'd send it to them, and as long as they sent me a playlist back, they would get the material. But if you didn't send me a playlist, man, I couldn't keep sending you stuff because I didn't know if it was getting airplay or not.
Playing cassettes was not the format of choice, but there were people who played lots of cassettes, and that was not a problem. And I would go down to SIA, which is in Staten Island, and they're this college in Staten Island. They had a radio show, so I'd go and occasionally every couple of weeks play, guest DJ, and I'd go to, to Dave's at ZBC, and Bill Berger did his lo-fi show on FMU. So there were people that were definitely interested in this. You just search out the people who have similar interests.
And once you start to become a member of this community, you'd find out about radio broadcasts that would broadcast these sorts of things. They were few and far between.
Sending my stuff out to the radio stations that were interested. There was probably about 6 or 7 radio stations in the States that were playing the stuff, usually between midnight and 4 in the morning. And they were the sympathetic ears, and just sending my stuff out to them, and usually they're people that I knew and would contact, and they would play the stuff, yeah.
We could manipulate the system and subvert it with our own music and get on a dance top 10 list with Budweiser, you know? With noise. Yeah, that's great.
I think my place in the underground music scene, certainly I did my own music, and that was a lot of fun for me. But because I had a radio show, and one of the first shows that I was familiar with that played nothing but home tapes, and I began that format of my show on KKUP in 1985 or so, I would play people's tapes on the air and have a lot of fun with that, and write to them, become friendly with them, and that's really where the community of home tapers and the cassette underground resided for me. I think that that's some of what's missing today, is some of that community feeling that I had back in the 80s.
I started trying to get airplay with my first cassette and got some response. I was able to get it played at local college radio stations here in Boston and Lowell. And so that inspired me to go on and produce a vinyl. And I produced a 7-inch called Intervention. And that I was able to then distribute to even more college radio stations. And once you hooked up with one college radio station, they could tell you about other college radio stations. So that was great. That really helped out a lot.
People were not accepting electronic music, especially when it was 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 people on stage without a drummer. The drum box thing was just not flying over here. So I saved my money and went to Europe, and automatically when I arrived there was great acceptance for what I was doing. There were large amounts of artists who were making music with drum boxes and synthesizers, ranging from industrial musics to experimental musics to pop as it was.
The European scene was important to the US scene because a lot of the Europeans were supporting our music, buying it, playing it, and also arranging for American artists to go over and tour over there. And that was great. So the Europeans were a big help to us.
They started the whole stuff, I think. The European guys were way ahead of the US as far as making electronic noise. And that people really liked, and they had a huge influence. They really did. I think they influenced a lot of people in the U.S. because it kind of caught on a little later here, but then actually lasted a little longer than it did over there. So, yeah, huge influence. Cabaret Voltaire, Throbbing Gristle, SPK, Clock DVA, those were the bands. And they not only influenced me, but they influenced a lot of other artists working in electronic music at the time.
I got in touch with Andy Export, who had his project called Man's Hate, and did a bunch of great compilations, and that led to my friend Lord Litter in Berlin, and he opened up the whole world, because he had a radio show himself, and still does, of all sorts of different independent music in Germany and throughout Europe.
Had stuff played on radio in Europe, and vice versa. They sent stuff here for radio airplay and review in magazines. Same thing here.
They were doing stuff that was very similar to what I had been doing, and it was just sort of exciting to know that there was people out there that I was discovering at the time. Although there was less contact and less correspondence with people in Europe, mostly because it was expensive. You know, we didn't have that much money to send out a lot to Europe, the postal rates and so on.
I really wasn't popularizing my music too much. I basically traded it to people for their music. I didn't really have any sales per se. I didn't have a sales department or a packaging department at the time because they didn't sell. I had a few that did. I had a few hardcore fans that bought stuff. Nope, wasn't looking for any kind of popularity. That's for dang sure. You don't record pure noise and expect to be popular. Not in this day and age, and I doubt ever. But we can still have fun.
Never really expected any type of popularity whatsoever. Just wanted to record with other people that had the same ideology, same recording methods.
I didn't expect any level of commercial success with it at all. It was just something I was doing, and just appreciated anybody that would, take their time to listen to it.
I guess what I was expecting was for people to see me as somebody that would start something and finish it, and make something and put it out there, and therefore they would want to work with me, or they would want to collaborate with me, or they would want to involve me. You know, I wanted to put myself out there as somebody that can get involved in things and see them through to the end.
I mean, I really had no claims and desire to be popular. Again, that's why I've been saying calling it experimental is probably a better choice of terms than, electronic, because there certainly was no looking for the popularity.
Recording was actually part of the performance for us.
I performed live very few times. I didn't really have an interest in that. I just had an interest in making my music, making my albums of these different songs and the different variety of styles, and putting them out in completed, works of art.
Compilations played a really big part, I think, in the networking process for a lot of people, because that was a way to actually hear a lot of artists in one convenient package that you otherwise may not hear, and that the magazines can describe for you, but you have to hear it to really appreciate it. And I think the compilations helped a lot of artists really find other artists that were similar or that inspired them in a new direction or with a new sound. So the compilations really helped a lot of people hook up with each other.
Throughout most of the 1980s, most of the recordings that I was involved in used a tape loop system, and I played with several different acts.
It went over the years from gut to more intellectual. 1984 was the first, If Bwana track, and it hasn't stopped in that 25 years. So in terms of effect, it let me do what I wanted to do, and once I was open to being able to do that, it's been able to continue.
It was a huge difference between 1980 and 1990. There was a lot of new gear that was coming out at the time. I had a little bit more money in 1990 than I did in 1980, and there was things like samplers that came out, and samplers were just, that was just like the heaven for me, because that was something that I was interested in doing, is processing, natural sounds from the world, and this would just open up all the possibilities rather than trying to do it all on tape and processing it in other more cumbersome ways.
By the end of the decade, I had incorporated digital samplers and synthesizers, recording on a 16-track analog machine that really expanded my horizons and my ability to produce a more complex, layered sound. So I definitely had a lot of changes during that period.
Now it seems like it's a fertile time for women in independent music, but at the time it seemed like it was very far and few between. There were people like Sue Ann Harkey, Heather Perkins, Amy Denio, there was a woman called Lori Paisley, Robin O'Brien. There was a lot of people who did various types of music, but it seemed like there was very little representation or even involvement, it seemed to me at the time, of women.
Those days were really special. I didn't realize it at the time. There was something pure and honest about them. And we were not trying to be rock stars per se, or it really was an art adventure, a networking adventure, and sort of a self-expression that allowed you a freedom to be somebody you couldn't be in the mainstream world.
It amazes me to listen to it today, how people were really making their own creative music during a time where, either disco or techno was just getting popular. I don't think anybody really inspired me to do it. I think I just felt the need to make some noise. And I did it my own way, and I packaged it my own way, and I released it through networking of other people that did the same thing.
That period was really important to me because that's when I basically formed my artistic vision. My style was all developed during that period. So it's a very creative, productive learning experience for me.
When I was doing my own music, and I was making my own stuff, doing the recording, doing the design work, making the packages, doing the distribution, calling people, doing all that. Those are things that are valuable in so many other aspects of life.
A lot of the music that I'm doing these days is returning to those old roots, full circle if you will, and methods of writing in an attempt to grasp some of that honesty again.
I continue to do my show of independent and home-recorded music.
There's a lot of people who are still plugging away since back then, and it's fun, and it's what I got to do. I never looked at it to make a living at it, and as a musician, I've had some nice things happen, and I'm still recording away and playing for, recording for other people and doing performances.
It's given me a really fond appreciation of that time. I still like to listen to music from that period. It's fun, it's angry, it's young, and it's fun to listen to.
Oh, I've met a lot of cool people and continue to meet a lot of cool people since then, and I've met new people, and continue doing the trading for a long period of time. I don't per se today. I just send some stuff out to a few individuals that I want to. Pretty much just using my website, harshrealitymusic.com. Check it out.
Curious Voltage will live on, and you might be seeing some releases in the near future.
One of the people that played with us, I'm actually getting back together with now here in 2009 to create a new Ing, and he is a percussionist named Vernon Lawton. And we hope to be releasing some old Redux versions of our old songs, plus some new material as Ing.
Now, yes, I'm in touch with some of the same people from those days, but it's through email. It's a little bit less of a personal thing, and things are created in record plants when I'm putting out CDs rather than in my home, sort of a made-to-order. When somebody would order a cassette, sort of grill it up like a hamburger for them and send it on out.
I still operate the same way. The whole DIY thing, music releases back then were seen as only being done by labels, by big, huge companies and stuff, where this idea of I can do it, I can put it out myself, and I can get it out there has applied to everything I've done afterwards. I don't do as much music now.
I don't record that much anymore, but I do maintain all the releases available for the public through my website and record label. I'm also expanding into these video projects here. So that's my main focus now, is to kind of be a librarian almost for what we used to do.
Well, I hope you like that. Thank you for listening.